Welcome to episode 17 of Mental Mastery. We interview the world's greatest minds on what it takes to live an epic life. I'm your host, Max Weigand, and today I'm joined by Dr. Sam Maniar, founder of the Center for Peak Performance based in Ohio. In addition to a PhD in sports psychology and counseling psychology, Sam has worked with sports teams such as the Cleveland Browns. In 2002, helped Ohio State University win a national championship in football. Sam also works in executive coaching and leadership development, and his work has been featured in numerous publications such as the New York Times, ESPN, and Fox News. So Sal, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So excited to have you. So one thing that I've really found interesting about you is that how you take this incredible background in sports psychology and apply it also to the business world. So what are some commonalities that you found in peak performance between sports and business and life in general?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of commonality. I think performance is really performance when you boil it down to the smallest piece, whether it's an athlete, a performing artist, or an executive. You have to perform on the job in the boardroom, when you're doing presentations, when you are leading people. And so I think they're very similar. I think the difference is that while athletes have started to embrace mental training and preparation, I don't know that that is as common in the business world. Thinking about visualizing an important presentation before you deliver it is not commonplace. To regulate your emotions throughout the day and utilize mindfulness or breathing techniques or things like that. Again, not common, but I think sport becomes a great metaphor for business people that they can really relate to. And I found that many successful executives are either passionate sports fans themselves or former athletes.
Oh,
And
wow.
so sport becomes just a great metaphor to teach some of the same skills to the folks in the business world.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think you're totally right about that. Like sports has so many it's such a great metaphor for life, right? Because there's all these setbacks and these failures and there's pain and adversity. We were just talking about running before, right?
Right.
Both of us ran in college. So like it's this constant like up and down struggle, and you need to like learn how to deal with your emotions and learn to like you said, visualize your results and stuff. So I love that. So what are some aspects that we can really use, or what are some skills that we need to develop in order to reach peak performance?
For me, it's a three-step process. So for me, it's number one, again, and this is whether you're an executive or whether you are an athlete, but I think number one is you have to understand what are the conditions that lead to good performances, great performances for you, and then what are the conditions that lead to bad performances. And everybody is different. So what works for me may be different from you and from the next person. So and I think it's going to be different across sports as well. So you may, if I'm a rifle shooter, obviously I'm going to want to be calmer.
Yeah.
If I'm an archer, I'm going to want to be calmer. If I am a sprinter, maybe I want to be a little bit more pumped up. But I think it's figuring out what are those ideal conditions that lead to good performances. So how are your muscles feeling? What are your thoughts? What does your warm up look like? All of those things. How energized are you? All of those things that lead to positive performance, and then you want to contrast it with some of your worst performances. So what are the true differentiators that lead to good or bad performances? So that's step one. I call that developing insight, and I think people can do that by going back and visualizing their best performances and their worst performances, and then journaling about them, or even charting. If you have got some 1 to 5 scales or 1 to 10 scales that you can use, how energized was I? How relaxed was I? How happy was I? How positive were my emotions? Those sort of things. So that's step one for me. And then when you figure out what are those differentiating factors, again, it'll be different for everybody. Step two becomes self-monitoring. So now it's keeping a performance log or a performance journal and learning to identify, for example, if I know that I need to be moderately relaxed, extremely happy, and moderately energized, well, those might be things that I'm going to track now on a daily basis. So now I need to learn to recognize, when am I too relaxed? When am I under relaxed? And what does that feel like? How do I know in my body? How do I know when my emotions are too happy or not happy enough, or when they become negative? So now it becomes self-monitoring on a daily basis, so I can learn to become in tune with my thoughts and my body and my feelings. Then it becomes the interventions or the techniques. And I think people are very quick to jump to the techniques without doing the first two steps. So then it becomes, all right, changing my self-talk, if that's the case. If I learn that positive self-talk is important for me and I catch myself thinking negatively, now it becomes, how do I flip that? How do I reframe that? Or if I realize that being relaxed is important for me, and I now recognize what tension feels like in my body, now I implement the techniques for relaxation, whether it's breathing or progressive muscle relaxation or biofeedback or autogenic training or mindfulness. But the technique to me isn't that important. It's the step, it's the progression. So step one, it's the insight. Step two, it's learning to self-monitor. And then step three are the interventions.
Well, that's so interesting, especially the point you're making here about first, like, kind of realizing like your weaknesses and realizing like, or how you want to feel like at your best, and then identifying the kind of gap between where you want to be and where you are. Because I think oftentimes we do it in like skills training and stuff, right? But especially when it comes to like the mental side of performance, we don't like dive in deep enough and see like, where am I actually lacking, right? Like, how do I want to feel? Like, what is the energy, like you said? Like, what is my happiness level or whatever it is? What is the tension that I want to feel? And then really finding the right strategy for that. That's so interesting. So what do you think holds most people back from achieving peak performance in their jobs? Like, is it just that they aren't aware of that, or is it just that they kind of struggle to really then use those insights that they have?
I think it's a lot of things. I think, when you really boil it down, a lot of people want to be successful, but do they really desire it? Are they really willing to do everything that's in their power to make it happen? And I find a lot of times, whether it's a business person or an athlete, if they were honest with themselves, the answer is no.
Hmm.
We know that certain things, whether it's hydration or sleep or mental training, we know that the chances of success will increase if you do these things. And most athletes are aware of these things, but when presented with them, sometimes they make other choices. They don't sleep enough. They don't hydrate enough. They don't follow through with the mental training exercises. Maybe they're not stretching enough. So I think the first barrier is just the desire. It's what I would call a want, but not necessarily a desire. And then I think it's discipline. It's I might try it a few times and then it's hard or it takes up time, and so I think that's part of it. But I also think there's a lot of things that could get in the way. It could be your thoughts. It could be a lot of times, as they say, the games are won and lost between your two ears, in your head, and
Yeah.
and the same is for a business person, right? We overthink things, or we don't prep enough and we don't think enough, and but I think there are a lot of reasons. I don't know that there's just one thing or a couple of things as to what gets in the way, but I do think a lot of it's our own thoughts. A lot of it can be lack of discipline, and then are you really, this is something you really truly desire, or is it just something that would be nice to have?
Oh, for sure. This is an amazing quote. I forgot by whom, but he said, if more knowledge was the answer, we'd all be billionaires with six packs, right? Like
Right,
oftentimes, like we have all the info, we know what to do. Like you said, like the
right,
hydration and sleep and
right.
stuff. We know we should be doing those things, but then we don't do them anyways. And so what are some ways that we can develop more self-discipline, more motivation, to really go for our goals?
Yeah, so it's kind of like you think about New Year's resolutions, right? It's like
Yeah.
people, most people don't last very long. So, I think goal setting is important. I think being able to track your progress and see your progress is important. I think that's very motivating. I think it has to be manageable. So I think, when people try to go from a sedentary lifestyle to, all right, I'm going to exercise for 1 hour every day, that's
It's
just
like,
not realistic. It's not manageable, right? So I think you have to take small steps, baby steps. I think it's important to track it. I think, um, you know to have some sort of reward along the way can help. And for some people, having a consequence along the way if they don't follow through can help. And I think you just have to know your personality. And I think having an accountability partner is probably the best thing. So if I have a coworker or a teammate that is going to kind of check in with me and keep me honest and call me out when I don't do what I said I would do, and encourage me and maybe do something with me, if I think all of that can really help people stay a little bit more disciplined.
Oh, I love that. Love that. So in sports and in business, where there's giving a presentation or performing on the field, handling pressure is incredibly important, right? We have all these like anxiety and these nerves sometimes coming up. So what are some ways that we can deal with just feeling too much pressure before a performance?
Yeah, so I mean, I think so. There's more cognitive interventions if you're trying to change your thoughts, and then there's more kinesthetic or physical or physiological interventions if you're trying to regulate kind of the feelings in your body, right? So, from the cognitive standpoint, for the first thing I usually try is just to reframe it. So I'll ask an athlete, or I'll ask an executive who's about to deliver a speech or a presentation that they're very nervous for, and I say, all right, well, what does it feel like when you're very nervous? And they'll tell me, oh, well, I start to sweat. My palms are sweaty. My forehead gets sweaty. My armpits. Um, I start to breathe faster and more shallowly. My heart rate speeds up. I have this feeling in my stomach. And I say, okay, now tell me when you're really excited about something. What does that feel like? And they would say, all right, well, I start to sweat. I start to have faster, more shallow breathing. My heart rate speeds up, and I have this feeling in my stomach. And I say, "Wow, what do you notice?" Well, they're the same. Well, actually, they are the same. Physiologically, there's no difference between excitement and nervousness. But one is kind of cognitively, one is we consider positive emotion, the other we consider a negative emotion. So a lot of times I'll tell an athlete, just tell yourself you're excited. I'll tell an executive, when you have to go deliver that presentation and you start to feel that way, tell yourself you're excited. And for a lot of people, that can be enough, believe it or not.
Wow.
But other times it can be, again, changing your thoughts, focusing on what you can control as opposed to what you can't control, breaking it down into more simple things and starting simple. So, maybe it's just getting a good touch on the ball. Maybe it's making a good pass. Maybe it's something about my stride if I'm a runner, or exploding out of the blocks, or something that's in my control, something small that if I do, it'll lead to the chances of success, rather than thinking about, all the implications of this event or this presentation. Trying to focus on the process and not the outcome. Trying to stay in the present instead of the past or the future. So I think those are all some good cognitive techniques. From a physical or physiological standpoint, I think breathing techniques to slow your heart rate down, to center yourself. I think it can also bring us back into the present if we're very focused on our breathing. So I think breathing can be very powerful. Progressive muscle relaxation. So learning to feel the tension in your body and then learning to release it. Of course, all of these things require practice before you need them. So that's another mistake that I think a lot of people make, is that, okay, I'm just going to keep this, in my backpack until I need it. Well, if you've never practiced it before, then it's going to be hard to be able to do it, the day of competition.
Yeah, when it's important, yeah.
Right. It would be, I always say, if I'm working with an athlete, okay, that's great. Show me how to do it. And then when I need it, I'll be able to do it like you, right? Well, no, I've had to practice this for years and years and years, or for weeks and weeks and weeks, hours and hours. Well, it's the same with mental training. If you've never practiced it before and you haven't become very skilled at it, then odds are you won't be able to use it when you get there.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think the most obvious example that probably most people are aware of is meditation, right? Because the reality is like
Sure.
the first 20, 10, 20 times you do meditation, you completely suck at it, right?
Right.
So
Your
so
mind
that's
is
why people are saying
wandering.
notice like it
Yeah,
takes a lot of time and effort.
for sure. For sure. So I think that preparation is key. I also think it's important to simulate pressure in your training. I think a mistake people make is that if you practice under ideal conditions, no pressure, good weather, no crowd noise, and then you go and you try to now perform under pressure, and all your training has been under ideal conditions. You're in for a rude awakening,
Yeah.
and so whether you are an executive or whether you're an athlete, I think it's very important to simulate pressure, simulate problems that might arise, and learn to kind of overcome them and prepare for them.
So when you talk about simulating outside of like the weather and stuff, do you mean like visualizing those things in advance, or how do you go about like
Yeah,
simulating
I
that?
think you can do it kind of virtually visualizing, or you can do it in vivo, kind of real. Um, so the real, you might play loud music to distract somebody, or have somebody screaming in your ear, or you might simulate being behind in the game or being ahead in the game, and it's the last 5 minutes and we're down one goal, or it's the last 5 minutes and we're ahead one goal. How are you going to perform, to hold the lead or try to take the lead? So different scenarios, I think you can simulate in training. I think you can simulate distractions. I think that's important. I think it's important, if I'm a free throw shooter, have people distract me, have people yell at me. Take the free throws at the end of practice when I'm tired, not at the beginning of practice when I'm energized and relaxed. Put something on the line. If I don't make five in a row, I'm going to have to do these 100-meter sprints, or something like that, or push-ups, or have friendly competition with your teammates. So I think that's all things. But then, yes, you can also simulate these things in your mind. Prepare for the weather, prepare for different conditions, prepare for teammate opponents, saying things, being ahead, being behind. Um, imagine the adversity, and of course, overcoming the adversity. We don't want to imagine the adversity and then seeing ourselves fail,
Yeah.
but see the adversity, imagine the adversity, and then overcoming the adversity. It could be as simple as, in the last Olympics, Michael Phelps's cap broke before one of his swim races, and he just calmly went up and borrowed a teammate's swim cap. And when he was interviewed about it, he talked about how he had simulated that, he had practiced for that
Wow.
exact thing happening, and he knew that if my cap breaks, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go borrow so and so's cap. And it was no big deal to him because he had practiced it, because he had prepared for it. So I think that's really important, especially in the absence of experience. If I'm new to this competition, if I'm new to this situation, and I don't have experience to rely upon, because if you think about what gives you confidence when you're under pressure, well, if I have past successes to rely upon, I'm going to be confident. If I've done this before successfully, I'll be confident. If I've put in all the preparation, I'll be confident, whether that's watching film, whether that's physical preparation, whether that's mental preparation. But if I don't have successes to rely upon, if this is new to me, if this is a situation I've been in before, it's hard to feel confident. So I think in that case, you definitely want to simulate it.
Oh, wow, I love that. So do you usually go about kind of simulating the process, or is it also focused on like kind of goal setting and just focus on like this is what I want to achieve, or more like this is what I have to do in order to succeed?
Yeah, I think all of the above. I think the problem with a lot of people with goal setting is they set the goal and then that's it, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, this is what I want to achieve. Okay, how am I going to do that? How am I going to achieve that? And let's practice achieving that now in training. Let's practice that in visualization. What are some obstacles that might get in the way of me in that goal? How am I going to overcome those obstacles if they happen? If they don't happen, great, but at least I've prepared in case they do. So, can you control everything? Can you prepare for everything? No, absolutely not. But I do think it's worthwhile to spend some time thinking about what obstacles, what roadblocks might get in the way? And then what is my plan? And then you practice, not just think about it, but you actually practice overcoming that obstacle. What if my, if your shoe has come off in multiple games before, okay, well then maybe you need to figure out a different way to tie your shoe, or you need to prepare for, all right, if my shoe comes off, here's what I'm going to do. Are you going to take the other shoe off and then go without two shoes? Are you? I mean, and that might be something you actually practice as opposed to just visualize.
That has actually happened to me during a cross country race before. I lost the shoe and I literally had to take off the other one and just run barefoot. Like,
Yeah, right.
that was horrible,
I
but
mean, but if you haven't prepared for it, or if it's never happened before,
exactly. I had no idea what to do. I just kept running for a bit. I was like, shoot, like what do I do now? Like,
right. And then you panic, and now you've wasted valuable time panicking, or maybe you try to run with one shoe on and one off, and that doesn't work.
no.
Right. So I think that's where either the past experience or the preparation is very important.
Oh, for sure. I actually heard about a funny story the other day about visualization. So there was this 400-meter runner, I forgot his name, but it was sometime in the 70s or 80s, I think. And at that point, like people saw like you're like 20 years old, 28 years old, and you're too old for like 400 meters, right? And so constantly, like he would be told that, and then he would visualize dying over the last like quarter of the way, right? Like he would visualize every single day, like, oh, I'm just gonna fade the last quarter, right?
Yep.
And that's exactly what he did when he went to races. Like he would like run superbly like the first three quarters, and then on the last one he would die every single time because he would just visualize in advance like the negative outcome. So visualization can be very powerful. Just like do it the right way.
Yes. What I always tell people is that negative visualization is just as effective as positive. So make sure you're visualizing positive outcomes. It's great to visualize mistakes happening and adversity, but always overcoming that adversity.
Yeah, for sure. Love that. So of all your years of experience, what has been one of the most surprising things that you've learned along the way about peak performance?
I think probably one of the most surprising things is still in 2018 that there's still a stigma of sports psychology and mental training. And while there are many coaches to train you technically, tactically, and physically, there still aren't enough coaches to train you mentally, at least not adequately trained coaches to train you mentally. And then there's not enough time devoted to it. There's still a stigma, there's still a resistance. It still comes last. It's an afterthought. And I would have thought by now that it would be more integrated into every level of training, whether you are a youth athlete or a professional athlete, whether you are, I expect that from the business world, but not so much from the sports world. So I'm still very surprised. And I think it's more Western cultures. I think, the traditional, Eastern European countries have always, back in the 70s, were embracing mental training and all that. And I think they have always been far superior and far advanced to Western Europe and Western, the United States and Canada. And I think, it just still hasn't been fully integrated and embraced. And that's probably been the most surprising thing to me.
Do you think that will be catching up over the next years or decades?
I think it will. I mean, I think the gap has been narrowed. And I think the top athletes in probably every sport are embracing it. And I think over time it will start to trickle down, filter down to other levels over other athletes. But I still think I see the U.S. Probably the furthest behind. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I think as a country, because we are so fortunate to have such large numbers of athletes, I don't think we focus as much on development as we probably should. So I think the mentality in the United States has been, let's talk about American football, for example. If I draft a football player, and he doesn't work out in the first year or two, I'll cut him and go get somebody else.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Because for everyone, there's hundreds of people waiting
Oh, yeah.
to do it, and so the focus has never been on development because we haven't had to develop. It's always been, if he doesn't work out, I'll go get somebody else, and so I think from a development standpoint, we are far behind, and that's one of many reasons why we didn't qualify for the World Cup. We haven't focused on developing players. If you don't work out, yep, we'll just go get somebody else.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work that way, and so I think the U.S. will probably be the last because of kind of the mentality of we'll just go get somebody else in terms of developing their mental skills, in terms of developing their technical skills, et cetera. So I do think the gap is closing, but unfortunately, I think the U.S. will probably be one of the last to fully integrate and adopt.
Wow, that is interesting. But for just from an international perspective, I realized like in the US at least for student athletes and stuff, there's way more offers than here in Germany, for example, as an athlete. So it's a lot easier I found in the US to really get into go into the coaching or sports psychology thing and really get help there. It's a lot easier I found than here in Germany or general in Europe.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, even in the high schools, right? The
Yeah.
sports in Europe are separate from school, and
Yeah, exactly.
clubs or gyms, and that's very foreign to Of course, in the United States, there's also clubs and there's AAU and other things like that, but a big part of sports is in high school.
Yeah, for sure. It's a whole nother system. Yeah.
Completely different. And then, yes, the scholarship opportunities and even the non-scholarship opportunities to play sports are great. But if you look at international sport, in many cases, the college sports are not on the equivalent level as as international sports,
Yeah.
and so it depends on the sport, right? But certainly college basketball is probably some of the tops in the world. But if you look at male college soccer, for example, it's good, but it doesn't compare to playing, coming up through the ranks of the Premier League teams or the Bundesliga or the La
Oh yeah,
Liga,
sure.
or other academies, and women's college soccer, absolutely, some of the tops. So it just really depends on the sports, but a lot of times the if you're comparing it to the international level, though there are more opportunities in the United States, it may not even be as high of a level as you may get in other countries.
Oh, for sure, for sure. What do you think it is that there's so many different levels depending on the sport? So that basketball has some of the top, soccer doesn't. Is it different standards that people set, or why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think if you boil it down, I mean, though soccer in the United States is popular at the youth level, it's not anywhere
That's true.
near where it is in Brazil or in Europe. And how can a country the size of Croatia make it to the World Cup
That was
final?
incredible. Yeah,
And the United States,
definitely congrats to them.
that is just it doesn't even it's not even fathomable. On the flip side, how does the United States tie France leading up into a few days before the World Cup begins with a bunch of young, untested American players, and then how does France then go on to win the World Cup? It's mind-boggling, right? But
It's
so I
crazy
think
sometimes.
basketball is just more valued in the United States.
Mhm.
I think it's easier. There are a lot of sociological reasons why, and I don't have all the answers, but it's a lot easier to get a pickup game of basketball going on a small slab of concrete than it is to get a pickup game of soccer going. And it's just not valued in American culture as much as football, baseball, and basketball. Those are the big
Oh, that's
three,
true. Mhm.
right? And I would put our athletes in those sports up against just about any country. How can the Dominican Republic, such a tiny country, produce so many baseball players? Well,
Yeah.
because that's what they value. That's what they're passionate about. That's what they grow up playing, and they've got it figured out at the grassroots level. You go to South America and kids are playing, soccer in the streets with socks and with, whatever they have, and no shoes. And they just grow up doing that. And I think in the United States, one of the equivalents we have to that is basketball. Kids are
For sure.
playing
Mm.
basketball everywhere all the time and so forth. So I just think it's a matter of priority and what you value.
That's true. Yeah, I really find it fascinating, especially in running, right? Like Kenya and Ethiopia, like dominating
Sure.
like distance running. And here in Germany, for example, it barely exists, but we have soccer and like not this year, but usually we're pretty good at that. So it's really about like setting priorities, yeah. And
No,
cultures.
you're still very good at it. They just didn't
They just
perform as
didn't do
you
well
do.
this year.
Still probably the most talented team I would say in the world. But we can feel your pain along with you, empathize with you for sure.
Oh, thank you, thank you. So Sam, on the show, we love to celebrate failures. So do you have a favorite failure in your life? Any time where you failed at something and later helped you become better and actually develop more skills and turn your life around for the better?
It's fun. It's funny you bring that up because that's one of the lessons I always teach athletes is that in life we are a product of our failures, and if you don't fail, you can't learn, right? So, um, and I always use the metaphor of dating. And if you go back to when you were 16 or 17 or 18 and first starting to date, the type of person you might have been attracted to then is probably very different from the type of person you might be attracted to in your 20s or your 30s because of all the mistakes you made, right? Oh, I went for the all looks and no brain, and that didn't turn out so well. Or I went for the, really passionate person, but there was no stability in their life, and that didn't work out very well. Well, whatever, right? So we are a product of our sports, and it's very important for an athlete to learn to embrace those setbacks and learn from them so that they can improve. I think it's a natural process. You make a mistake, you learn from it, and you make adjustments, and then you move on, right? So for me, boy, lots of failures, but one that I usually talk about the most as a sports psychologist was, so you mentioned in the introduction how I worked with the 2002 Ohio State football team that won the national championship, and Coach Tressel would have me on the sidelines and in the locker room, and would have me come out of the tunnel. So at Ohio Stadium, for your listeners who don't know, there's 110,000 fans, and so imagine coming out of this tunnel and onto this field, and there's 110,000 screaming fans, and the band is playing, and
Oh, way to go get some pressure right there.
right. So I did that one time, and I quickly realized this isn't about me. This is about the athletes. And this isn't my experience. This is theirs. And I shouldn't be coming out of the tunnel onto the field. So from that day forward, before the football players came out, 5 minutes before I would come out of the locker room, I would walk around the stadium, around the edges, go take my place on the sideline. And it was very easy, though, to get caught up in the excitement and very, very easy to lose sight of who is this about, and what am I doing this for? And I've always preached that if I do my job, you should not be dependent on me. And so all of a sudden I got too excited and caught up in the moment of all these fans and how cool of an experience, but
Yeah, for
it
sure.
wasn't about me. So, I have championship rings that football teams and soccer teams have given me, but I don't I don't take pictures of me holding those rings and putting them on, book covers and on my website. And I'm grateful that they gave me those rings, and they're a nice conversation piece and a showpiece, but I don't wear them. Now I know sports psychologists that do, and to me, then it's about you and it's not about the athlete, and to me that's a problem. And and it's a very slippery slope, and I felt that happening,
Oh,
um, and I caught myself. That's one mistake that comes to mind.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible that you realize that like, hey, like I have to put the focus on them and like help them perform at their best. And you were able to like catch yourself in that excitement. Because I'm sure that it's a great experience walking out to 110,000 people.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a great experience, no doubt. And the other thing people say, wow, you worked with the 2002 national championship football team. Yeah, I did. But let's talk about all the teams I've worked with that had losing seasons too. There are more of them too. So I think if you're going to take credit for the teams that you succeeded with, I think you also need to own the teams that failed too, right? So that's another thing that I think in terms of mistakes. Early in my career, I would have on my website all the teams, their record before they worked with me, and then their record after they worked with me. Okay, but what about all the teams that got worse,
yeah.
in terms of record, right? So that's another mistake I would say is that, take more responsibility for the teams that did not perform and less responsibility for the teams that did perform.
Oh, for sure. Even though it's easy to do the other way, right? Only
Of course,
look at
right?
the positives for sure. I like to think only of the good races. The bad ones don't matter.
Of course. Plus the other thing, if you think about just regression to the mean, by the time an athlete gets to me, more often than not, they're already at the bottom, right? Because
Yeah.
of the stigma. The last thing they're going to do is go to the psychologist. They're going to try everything else first. So a lot of times it's just instilling some hope in the athlete, providing them with some hope. And it's nothing, no technique that I did. It's just listening to the person, giving them hope and buying some time because they're going to bounce back, right? They're going to regress to the mean. And so putting too much stock in the success they had and oh, it's all because of me. No, probably not, right?
But he certainly had a part in it, so that's really amazing.
Sure,
So
sure.
I'm really curious, what does like mental training look like for like the NFL or like all those professional teams? Like, is it usually like one-on-one coaching? Did you like come up in front of the whole team, give presentations? How can we imagine that?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's a combination of both. I think it's important to begin, so introduce a topic with the whole team. It's safer. It can be more interactive. The skeptics can hear from veteran athletes who maybe have utilized those techniques or maybe have worked with the sports psychologist. So I think you start with a group. To me, that group session is only about planting seeds, though. It's just about, if you think about the trans theoretical model of change, for example, they may be pre-contemplators. They're not even thinking about using visualization, for example. My goal is just to move them to contemplation, just to think about, oh, now it crosses their mind. And then if they want to work on these things, then they would do that with me one-on-one. So I think a combination of group and individual is the way to go. Some research I did found that if the sports psychologist worked with the team doing group sessions, then the individual athletes were 3 times more likely to seek out individual performance
Oh,
training.
wow, really?
So I think there's something to getting to know
Mhm.
the sports psychologist, breaking down the stigmas that leads to, okay, maybe they're not so bad, or they're just a regular person
They're
like
not gonna
me.
bite, yeah.
I kind of like that person. It's less scary now to then go and meet with the person that they don't know. So I think that's important. So for me, it's both.
Yeah.
It's group training with the team where you introduce concepts, and then it's working with me one on one if you want to really tailor it and work on it. And then I'm going to give you homework. I'm going to give you work to do between sessions because just like the physical skills, you need to practice these things. And then you're going to come back and I'll hold you accountable. And if you
Mhm.
didn't do them, we're going to understand why. What got in the way? What were the barriers? And I won't be angry with you, but I'm going to help you understand what got in the way. How can we overcome those barriers? And if you did do them and they didn't work, we're going to try to understand why. And maybe we need to change them, or maybe we need to modify them or replace them. I don't know. And if they did work, great. What parts worked? And let's build off of that. So to me, that's the ideal is you have team sessions to kind of scratch the surface, introduce a topic, then followed up by individual sessions that are tailored, followed up by individual homework or mental training on your own in between sessions.
So before I ask my final question, where can listeners connect with you online?
So you can go to my website, and that is www.c4pp.org. That's the number 4, so the letter C, the number 4, pp.org. You can also go to centerforpeakperformance.com. That one's a little bit longer, so I think people prefer the shorter one. On Twitter, my Twitter handle is at Sam_Maniar, Maniar. And on Facebook, you can go to at center, the number 4, peak performance.
Awesome. I'll also put up the links to that. So last question, what does mental mastery mean to you?
To me, mental mastery, it means, so I think learning. So when you think about mastery, it's doing it over and over and over until you get it the way you want. So in this case, peak performance, right? So a big part of that is something you alluded to. So mental mastery for me is learning from all of our setbacks, all of our mistakes, and making the adjustments and the corrections along the way. So I think it is embracing the setbacks, embracing the mistakes, embracing the failures, embracing the losses, and learning from that. That's to me what mental mastery is.